All right, so the simple calendar gem, I want to actually make sure that's all set up first, and tricks as well. Once we just get that set up, we'll go right into the meeting stuff next, which we left off with in the last video. So one thing I need to do is include a style sheet for the simple calendar gem, and that's going to look like this once we add it to our assets, style sheets, application.css. So one thing, when you run a Rails new app, this will already have a comment here. I removed mine by default. Feel free to just add that back, and you can do something like this, and it should be all set up. We are going to need one that's going to be tricks as well. So I already know that it's going to come into play. And then aside from that, we can actually import any new file from the style sheet by just saying require tree, like so, and pass a period below. So that just tells Rails to, if I create new style sheets, which I will, they can compile down into the application file and be rendered as one style sheet in the end on our app. So it's kind of a nice thing that the asset pipeline which Rails is famously known for, does for us out of the box. You don't have to do so much configuration out of the gates like you would with something like Webpack. On top of that, we need to add a little bit more JavaScript too. So we can go into our applications.js. Below active storage, I added tricks. So you could just do require tricks. And that should be it there. So we'll save that. And then it'd be of benefit to reboot your server. So I'll do that by hitting Control C, and then we'll just hit the up arrow and hit it again, form and start. So one more thing for the simple calendar is that we can actually customize the views a bit. It comes with just baked in stuff from the start, but we can go ahead and make it a little more nice, I guess. So just like devise, you can render views. So I'll do that right now. Cool. So this creates a folder in our views folder that's going to be called simple calendar. In there you can configure if you want the base calendar modified or the month calendar or week calendar, which of course you can display different calendar views, which is great. The simple calendar, it makes it so easy. So really am thankful for that gem for this reason. On top of that, I think we're set up, but we do need to start by adding some stuff to our meetings controller. So let's go ahead and do that now. And I am going to change this to JS real quick. And get rid of this. Cool. We'll come back to that. So app controllers, meetings controller. So by default, this works with zero authentication, just because that's how Rails predicts the base point of entry for a new thing. We are finding the meeting by its parameter ID right here. And then each new parameter that comes through, we're permitting below for security's sake. So those things are important when you want to bring them through from a front-end form. You need to permit them here. On top of that, I am going to get just the current user meetings. So we'll say current user meetings.all. So that only displays the meetings relative to the currently logged in user, which makes sense if you think about the end user who is just going to use this app as a reference, more or less, or a way to communicate with the person on the back end who is the admin. So this could be different for if it is an admin level. You might want to just see all the meetings. So you'd check, say, like if admin user or something, whatever you call it, or say maybe unless show this, else show something else. That's up to you how you want to do that. I'm just going to leave it as is for now, but feel free to extend that. We'll get into the admin side later on, for now, we're just going to get this thing working. So I definitely want to authenticate this whole scenario. So instead of just actual basic actions, I want to authenticate the whole meetings controller. And you could do that just like so. So you wouldn't pass like only here. It would just be for everything, which is what we want. We don't want a user to actually get into anything before they're logged in. When we do create a new meeting, we want to make sure we save the user to the meeting itself, meeting instance. And typically I would do like current user.build here, which you can. It works the same way, but we could do meeting.userid equals current user. We could just set it. After that, we'll come down and just make sure everything looks good. Okay, so we'll come back to this once we get the admin level stuff needed, as well as the payment level stuff. One thing we do need on this show view will be the comment as well, which I'll have to add once we add that model. We haven't gotten that far yet, so we'll leave it alone for now. And then we can spruce up the model to be, it already belongs to a user thanks to the generation we used based on the references part. We will need to modify the user to have many meetings. So let's establish that relation. So it'll say it has many meetings, and then we can do dependent destroy. So meeting would be destroyed if the user was destroyed. Cool. Dependent. I think that's right. Okay, so then we can come back and check out our meetings, and it's going to say, oh, you need to sign in. So that's working good. Let's sign up. I'll use my main user. So many emails. Sign up. Okay, so now we can create a meeting because we're signed in. If I do create a meeting, it's going to be based on my user level. So let's go ahead and just make something up for now. User, it's going to be, actually we need to remove that before anything because Rails is going to look for it and not know what to do and error out if we try to submit that form because the user ID is a field that is required. So we'll go ahead and remove that. And that should do the trick. Let's go ahead and go back and try this again. Let's see if it submits. So we obviously have the user ID here because that's what was saved, but we need to remove that from the show view, of course, but we also need to hook up some helpers that make this date render better, as well as make sure that this stuff is rendering right up here too. Like if I'm logged in, I shouldn't see login again or sign up, should see other stuff. So let's go and first modify the show view real quick. Get rid of the user part just for sanity's sake, and this part we don't need because we're going to add that to our application template. All right, so let's update the application template before I do anything else because I think that's going to play a big role in how this looks in the end and functions. I might speed this part up because it is just a lot of markup, but feel free to follow along. One quick thing before I do speed it up, if I do, is I'll need to actually include Stripe coming up. So maybe I'll go ahead and type that out to be in this folder or in this file. I'll grab it from our demo project as a quick and easy way to do so. As well as this tag for the publishable key. I'll comment that part out for now, because I don't want it to error out. But essentially we're going to use secret credentials to store our Stripe publishable key, which is a fake one or a test one to use for the payment side of this coming up. So we'll get there. Besides that, I think we're set to go on this level. All right, so I'll go ahead and start styling this out a bit and we will continue on. This is so much boilerplate code that I'm gonna copy this over for sanity's sake, just so I'm not going crazy. I'll talk you through it because I feel like you guys can reference this and get the gist of what's going on. But feel free to tell me if not. So I've got a fancy SVG icon that you saw in the demo app that's going to be part of this one. And we're linking to the root path here. And on a link to helper, you can actually do a block fashion by adding do to the end. But when you do that, you need to make sure the text that you pass as the string is within the do block every time. The same for any block element. So here's an SVG icon with that in mind. Below that, I have a check for if the user is signed in. We have that method available from Devise, and we can check if they're signed in. If they aren't, we'll show a login sign up link. If they are, we'll show a dashboard, which will be the meeting's main path. A schedule a new session path, which is a new meeting path. And you can see at the very end, it's unless you're admin. So that's going to be like, if as an admin, I don't want to see the new session path. I won't want to schedule a session with myself. That's kind of dumb. So unless that's happening, will we see it? This is a helper I created, which I'll go ahead and create after this, just so that doesn't error out. And then the admin itself will check if it is the admin on this link and display a user's path. We don't have this one yet, so I'm actually going to comment that one out. And then finally, a sign out, typical sign out button, which is a new method delete, which is how you would do a destroy action on that session. If you're new to Rails, this is probably like you're like what, but if you've been following along, maybe you've gotten to this far in the series, maybe you're getting the grasp of things with these link to helpers based on our routing and are given to us by default thanks to Rails routes. So if you go to localhost Rails info routes, you can see all of those available to us. And this is where I get them from. And you can see I don't have that method, so it's erroring out. So let's go ahead and add that quick. All this other stuff, the classes and whatnot, are strictly Tailwind CSS. Feel free to use Bootstrap or something else if you're not jiving with this type of markup. I like it for the simple fact that I can design anything with it and not be tied into a look like Bootstrap. You know how all the other websites you see kind of have that look and feel that are similar. That's what I'm trying to get away from. Down here, this might be new to you. It's basically checking if there is a content for block we define in the views somewhere, which we can just basically say, instead of the regular content, render this content by doing something like content for content do end. This could be in any other view, and we could just pass in like new content or something and it would update. We won't be doing that, but that's just something you could do. Here it's just checking in case that happens. If it doesn't, we're gonna just yield the content as normal. Okay, so let's add that helper next, and actually a couple helpers. So we'll do app helpers, application helper. In this file, we'll add 3 at this point. So it'll be readable time. This is gonna make our dates look a lot nicer because they currently don't. Oops, not that. So we'll pass in the time property, which we'll bring in from the front end, and then we'll do this method on it. And it's going to be within quotes, but you can pass in a bunch of these symbols to dictate how it looks in the end. This is going to be how we end up using it. Cool. So we'll get to using that in a minute, just to show you context. And then I typically have this one. I should probably just include this in the application template, but this is going to be author of whatever, just checking if that current user is the author of this thing. So we'll say user signed in, can't type in question mark and current user ID dot ID is equal to record, whatever we passed in here, user ID. So in most instances, you're going to have a user ID associated with whatever user that is navigating your app, and that's going to be on any given model if the user belongs to it or authors it. So that's just a handy way to check that, as opposed to writing this all in our views, which gets messy fast. All right, so finally I'll do one that's admin, and since I have this already on my database table, I can go ahead and use it and it shouldn't error out. So user signed in and current user.admin, and I'll show you what I'm referring to. That's in, if you go to database schema, that's on my users table right here. It's a Boolean property, and we defaulted it to false. So any new user who joins won't be an admin by default. You can trigger an admin to be an admin using Rails console or the UI if you want to go that far. Up to you how you want to do that. We'll have to do that soon once we need the admin property in. So maybe I could demo that real quick just to give you an idea. So this should work, but since we're not an admin, you notice we don't see, I could say if admin here and it will show, it won't show, I mean, just to give you an idea. So let's say unless, and it'll come back. Cool. All right, so one thing we could do to enhance the meetings view is clean up the view a bit. We'll start with the index, and I'm gonna make use of some partials. So let me clean this up real quick. Pretty much just gonna get rid of all this and start from scratch, just so you guys have context. So we're gonna have a main container, which comes from Tailwind. And we'll have a margin auto property, so it floats to the center. And then we'll have margin of 4 rims on top and bottom, or whatever that actually ends up being. I think it's something else. And then we could check if, unless current user, and we can use just current user here since they have to be logged in to see this view, meetings.any. So if they have any meetings at all, we will display those. Else we'll display a call to action to create a new one. So unless they do, we will render the meetings call to action. So let's do that. Render meetings, I called it this, CTA. Else render meetings landing. And these are just names I gave it. You can call them what you want. But I am going to pass in our meetings instance variable from our controller on the index action through. So context on our meetings index, we have this variable available to us. It's an instance variable that will allow us to pipe through those meetings and render them on the front end. So let's utilize our partials and make those. I'll make one that's called meetings underscore cta.html.erb, and then another one called meetings landing .html.erb. All right, so our CTA should be pretty simple. It's just a basic button to schedule a meeting. One thing I want to do is copy over some assets from our demo project into this one. So I'll go into my documents, sites, where I'm at, the demo, app, assets, images. Just copy these over to our current project. So sites again, consultly, paste those in. They're just SVGs from a site called Undraw. If you want to source those, this is a sweet site. It's like open source illustrations for stuff, and it's really nice. Kudos to the maker or makers. Great work. But it's a easy way to have that in your arsenal for example apps or just real apps in general. So since that's in my images directory now, I can utilize those. We'll go ahead and do this view real quick. So be max with quite a few classes here. Bear with me. So I don't have any sessions yet, I believe. Oh, it's because I haven't rendered the actual landing yet. I need to loop through our meetings. So we should end up having to confuse myself there. So what I could do is go back and delete those. So let's do that. I'll do it using the console. So we could just do user equals user.last, which should be only me. Then we could just say user.meetings destroy all. So it should delete both of those. You see them there. Cool. So then if I go back to this app, I should see that empty state. Yeah, there we go. Cool. So this is just checking, because we're checking if any meetings exist in our index, it will render that call to action. Otherwise, it'll render our actual meetings. So here's kind of the look and feel I have so far, but our styles aren't quite up to spec. So what I'll do is probably round out the video with doing that and come back and finish these views. So let's go to our app, JavaScript directory, our style sheets, and in the application file, you'll see imported components, which are created by default. Here I'm going to have button components. These are basic buttons that I've had. I'm going to actually just copy this stuff from the other project to save a little time. I'll talk through it here in a sec. All right, so with Tailwind, you can actually use the @apply method to hook into it to apply the same classes as CSS styles in your classes that you define here. So these are custom, and I'm defining them, adding my own custom styles as well as applying Tailwind classes to them. This gives me a way to just componentize CSS, so I'm not writing things like this all over the place. It makes sense if you reuse a lot of things, so feel free to do that, but try not to go crazy with it because it can get pretty exhaustive. But then here's our main call to action after that, so that's working, looking good. Maybe in this video I'll finish the other view as well, just to get that rounded out. While I'm here, I might as well copy all the CSS we're going to use. One's going to be called tabs for the main dashboard area, and we need to create that file. So new file, tabs, SCSS, pass that in. Awesome. Okay, so then we'll get the markup at least for the meetings landing view and our partial, and then we'll be on our way. So let's start here. This one's kind of a doozy, so bear with me. Feel free to speed this up. All right, guys, so I finalized this view. It is definitely not working order yet because this requires some JavaScript, of course, to make tabs work, but our basic markups here, I just wanted to denote what's going on. If you remember on the index view, we're rendering through all of our meetings and passing this instant variable through by calling this variable within the partial itself. So we can have access to that right here and loop through each meeting and display stuff about it. So here I've got the name, and we'll link to the meeting itself on our meetings tab, which will be the meetings tab. Content, and then we're using that helper we added a while back that was readable time to hook into the start time and end time and display those in a nicer fashion. And then we'll have a cancel meeting link for admin only. We won't see this at this point, but it will be there once I queue my account to be an admin. Then below is going to be the calendar partial rendering. We are going to render another partial I haven't created yet in our messages, or I keep saying messages, it's meetings folder. I still need to create that, so I have a feeling this will error out, but we can go and see if it does. We do need to create a meeting first, so I'll go ahead and do that. Just test one. Meeting. And don't worry, we'll spruce this form up. Really doesn't matter here. There's something before and after. Okay, create. Okay, we got that. And then if we go to the dashboard, I'll probably get an error. Yeah, we don't have that partial yet. So let's go ahead and add that. This is another way to render a partial. Rails is smart enough to know that if you have a partial in your current folder, you can render it this way. And locals can just be passed without that locals attribute. So we just do something like this, and it's just as fine. So we'll pass in calendar partial. And this is where we're going to hook up to the calendar gem, the simple calendar gem. So we'll display the month calendar, which is part of the gem. It'd be sweet if Rails did this by default, but it does not. So we'll say events, and here's where we'll pass in that meetings variable we passed through right here. So that's coming through. We'll have access to that, and we can loop through each meeting and display them for the appropriate calendar dates and meetings. And then within that, we can actually loop through the meetings itself. We'll display the date at bare bones form, then we can loop through each do meeting we just want for each date that displays to include the meeting itself and then a link to that particular meeting each time it's displayed. So it will look like this, just to give it a block element. Meeting.name will be the text we see, and then the meeting itself will be the actual meeting we can link to. And we'll just pass in the class of link, which again I defined as a base style in our buttons file right here. Here it's defined as text indigo. I think the kickoff template has it as gray, so you might need to change that if you want it the same color. This should work in the end. So yeah. So I think what's happening here is we're rendering another partial, which is the view inside our simple calendar view, and it's using a different date format. So I'll actually need to update that. I think this video has gone on long enough, so I'll do that coming up. But all in all, we have our base view ready for the JavaScript we need, as well as displaying the relative content for all of our meetings that we'll have coming up. So I will add that, some base styles to clean up this calendar itself as well. It is a big table element, which is kind of hard to work with. So that's something to keep in mind if you need this to be responsive or something like that in the future. It's kind of a bear to work with. But we'll come back and fix that up. Then we'll move on to adding comments to meetings as well as at implementing tricks and all sorts of goodies coming up. So stay tuned.